My name is Dave Barker, and I am sad to say that today is the day that my marriage to Claire Hughes ends. Our story began so promisingly 14 years ago. I worked for a company that distributed pumps and motors. We were the largest company in the tri-state area. We did not manufacture pumps and motors. We distributed them from large manufacturers. The company was doing very well, and part of their success was me and my team. You see, the CEO, Gary Powers, believed that if they had a mechanical engineer on staff, along with one or two lathe operators, it would actually make the company better. I was an engineer. He was right. Our job was to test new types of pumps and motors that manufacturers were trying to sell us. We have also been diagnosing problems with existing lines. Our first success almost became our end. One company from Germany advertised a new super pump for industrial waste. The company had an excellent reputation and sold these new pumps as quickly as they could produce them. We had already worked with them and asked for a couple of samples. The Germans were happy to provide them, but wanted an exclusive agreement for North America. We had a week to make a decision, otherwise they would have looked for other partners. My team and I had been working for about 6 months at that time, and we were already making progress. For example, there was a valve problem on one of our popular pumps that only occurred under certain conditions, and we solved it by modifying the valve, which was both cheap and easy to do. Gary had been very pleased up to this point, and then he gave us the news about the new pump. Logically, the pump should really have been the obvious choice. The company was from Germany. They definitely knew how to engineer things and had a proven track record. We just had to go through the formalities of learning about the pump and then sign the deal, get exclusive, and double our annual pump sales. But Gary Powers wasn't stupid. He had worked his way up from scratch and knew if we didn't try and didn't try hard enough, it would be a cardinal sin in our company. Making mistakes due to hard work was acceptable, but laziness was not. Mistakes due to lack of care were grounds for dismissal. We had 3 samples to test. One worked for 7 days, pumping a thick slurry full of debris. We exposed it to all sorts of climates, desert heat and dust, cold and snow and rain and moisture. With the other, we tried everything: dust, dirt, chemicals. The pump did not like sand, and the sand combined with the slurry was harmful to one of the components. I won't bore you with the engineering details, but it didn't give me and the team any confidence, so we told Gary not to buy it. However, we tested 2 more new pumps at the same time, and one from an Italian company showed more promise. We recommended that one. For the next 6 months, the sales team hated us. Sales of the Italian pumps were unimpressive, but the German pumps we rejected were selling like hotcakes. Then reports began to come in, first from the Southwest, of pump failures. In short, the company that made the deal with the Germans almost went bankrupt due to recalls, repairs, and bad publicity. Sales of our Italian pumps took off, and the sales department threw my team a dinner. The worst part of my job was working with our publicist. Gary believed that I should be present when our advertising company came up with a new advertising idea. He didn't want us to be shamed for advertising that promised too much or was technically unrealistic. It made sense, but it was still hard to take in so much nonsense at once. The only saving grace was that the man I usually worked with, Jeff Barons, was a pleasure to work with, a true professional. However, I just didn't like the advertising business, but I had to do what I had to do. That was until one day Jeff brought someone else with him to take over our account. He was promoted and Claire Hughes became our new publicist. When she walked into our conference room, I was amazed. She literally left me speechless. She wasn't a stunning beauty or had huge breasts or long legs or anything like that. Claire was slightly above average in looks and was nice to look at, but she just seemed like what I needed in my life. Somehow I was able to make it to the end of the meeting without embarrassing myself, although I don't remember anything that was said. I spent most of the time just looking at her and trying to think of a way to ask her out. Jeff seemed to notice my problem and made sure to hand me her business card, telling me to contact her for further feedback on the sales pitch. I waited until the next day and called her at work. She seemed surprised to hear me, but agreed to the date. We dated for 6 months before she was convinced that she really liked me. She couldn't understand why a guy like me would want to be with her. This was my introduction to her insecurities. I was just the male equivalent of her, a little above average, but nothing special. However, she thought she was out of my league and was afraid of being offended. Before we slept, she wanted to be sure that I wouldn't leave her right after. Claire wanted an exclusive relationship, and somehow I had to back it up with evidence to allay her fears. The fact that I was already with her on exclusive terms was just words. There was only one way I could think of, so I surprised her with an engagement ring, and she said yes. This must have been the proof she was looking for. We had a lot of wonderful sex in the next year before our wedding. Life was good, we both worked hard, and soon we started talking about children. That's when her insecurities began to get the better of her again. Everything blew up at our Christmas office party that year. My team usually stuck together at these events, so when our new administrative assistant arrived, Claire was horrified. I'll be the first to admit that Roxanne is a real beauty, but she also had a very handsome husband. More importantly to me, she was good at her job, and that helped our team a lot. We worked, and she did the documentation. However, Claire saw only the impending romance, and the tension was palpable. When we left the party, she started yelling at me even before I closed the car door behind her. I slowly walked around to my door, but she didn't stop until we got home and were in our bedroom. She stopped screaming at this point, and I calmly asked her, "What do I need to do to get you to trust me?" She said she doesn't know, but we won't have children until she figures it out. I then suggested that it didn't mean we couldn't practice. I could show her how much I loved her. She was too excited, so she put it off until the morning. It's really strange to me that a woman who thinks you might cheat on her would refuse sex for this reason. Well, I just took advantage of it in the morning and we stayed in bed until noon. Exactly 2 weeks and 2 days later, I learned that she had found the answer when she presented me with a postnuptial agreement. Yes, uncertainty takes its toll. It covered every possible aspect of custody, child support, maintenance, and our home. It's not like we have a home. It's quite difficult to give exact amounts, but there were a lot of formulas based on percentages of future earnings and the like. The lawyer who reviewed it for me said it was fairly normal. In fact, if Claire cheated, I would be in a great position with sole custody and child support. In addition to the post-nuptial agreement, our phones had to have a locator app, and the passwords for our phones and laptops had to be shared. Random testing was to be allowed at any time. Obviously, I signed the post-nuptial agreement and agreed to the phone and laptop idea. I had no intentions of cheating on her or leaving her. I loved this woman, and 3 years later we had Leslie and twins Max and Mark. Claire returned to work as soon as possible after each birth to continue her career advancement. It's no surprise that she was very insecure about her position and advancement, but she had children and I'm very happy about that. Best of all because I was expected to be the primary caregiver. We never talked about it, but she liked her job and wanted to advance. I have already accepted that I will be in second place after her work. I did, however, check her phone and laptop for any unusual activity. I also always looked at our locator app to see where she was when she was late at work. I have to admit, I was a little suspicious that she might be trying to get ahead at work by having sex on the side. This was definitely not the case. Her boss, Jeff, told me at a social event that my wife had earned the nickname Madam Seriousness. It was better than Ice Queen or Bitch, but it meant about the same thing. She was work, work, work. She didn't have friends at work, didn't flirt, and was focused on being the best. People respected her hard work, but were put off by her cold demeanor. Men especially sensed her attitude, and, unless they worked for or with her, avoided her. There were many more accessible women in the company. Then came a second explosion of uncertainty in our marriage. Claire wanted separate finances from the start. One joint account where we contributed 50-50 to family accounts, and the rest didn't matter to the other. If I wanted to invite her somewhere, I paid. Vacations were 50-50, but over time she wanted to go on vacation less and less. She might not have been at the top of the list for the next promotion if she hadn't always been there. Well, the kids were really young. This wasn't a big problem, but as they got older, it became a problem. However, first there is a second explosion, and then we can talk about vacations. I wanted to start my own pump and motor company. I had a few ideas that I was working on in my studio at home, and I wanted to bring them to life. I first tried to get Gary interested in starting production. Gary, who I enjoyed working with, turned out to be retiring, and his son was going to succeed him. Andrew Powers didn't like our team at all. He was entertained enough by our suppliers that he wanted to get rid of us. We asked too many questions and rejected too many new models, so we had to leave. His father, Gary, and I had a serious conversation when I came to him with the idea of starting to make my own products. I thought he would support the idea, but at the end of our conversation, he told me that I should take my team and start my own business. He will give us a guaranteed 3-year exclusive contract to continue what we have been doing to help us establish ourselves. He was going to retire in 3 years, and he knew his son wanted to kick us out. We would have our way, one way or another. Maybe we could even sell them pumps and motors, but that would be at Andrew's discretion. What an amazing opportunity, and I couldn't wait to get home and tell Claire. It didn't go well. That's putting it mildly. How could you do this to me? How will we be able to pay for our house? She insisted that she would not support me or get me out of trouble. What she did tell me was that she was very confident that my idea would fail and leave us destitute. I had to make my monthly payment, or else. What else? You may ask. Less than a week later, I learned that explosion number 2, or an addition to the first, appeared exactly a week later. Our marriage money agreement was now set to be set in stone forever. Her money in any form was to be kept out of my reach. In turn, my money and my new business were unavailable to her. The payment on the joint bank account was due every month with no excuses, medical or otherwise. Basically, she was confident that my business would fail and I would return to a stable job. If I could not meet my obligations, I might go bankrupt as far as she was concerned, and I would be forced to leave until I could meet my obligations. Claire refused to listen to anything about my guaranteed contract or the patents I filed for my ideas. She wanted financial security, period. I was obviously not very happy with Claire's lack of support, and the second part, after the wedding. But as you can imagine, my lawyer couldn't believe she would sign it. He and the other lawyers at his firm knew my business plan and believed that by age 35, I would be a millionaire. If something goes wrong and we get divorced for any reason, she won't get anything. So I signed it despite her lack of faith in me, but I loved her and didn't care about money or infidelity. You could say I felt completely safe. My business took off, and soon we were making pumps and motors and employing 50 people. Roxanne was still with me and was my director's supervisor. Without her, I wouldn't be able to juggle the startup and the needs of my children. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed their sports and school activities, but she helped me make it happen. Claire, of course, got promoted again and spent more and more time at work. There was a problem. We never went on vacation as a family. Claire didn't take any days off at all. She thought that if she missed even one day, she might miss something and get in trouble, or worse, get a bad performance review. Yes, I thought maybe there was something more to it, and I kept an eye on her and even hired a private investigator for a week, but she just worked. The private investigator even gave me a discount because Claire did nothing but work and came home. Before this, vacations consisted of me and the kids. We went camping to the lake, to the beach, to the mountains, and to my parents who lived in another state. Claire stayed at work, that is, at home. However, things came to a head when Leslie, Mark, and Max asked to go to Disneyland. They asked me, and I said, sure, that's a good idea. They're at the age where they can really have fun there. Leslie was 9, and the twins were 7. They wanted to know when we could go and if Mom would go with us. I said we could go to their school for spring break, but they would have to ask Mom. I immediately sent Claire a message warning her what was in store for her when she got home. Claire was a workaholic, but almost always came home for dinner. She tried her best to keep everyone interested and then washed the dishes with the kids while I usually prepared dinner. I left for work early and returned at 4 so that I could be at home with the children and cook dinner. Then she would usually grab her laptop and go back to work on our couch or at the kitchen table, depending on where I was. After the kids went to bed, we didn't have to wait long. We have sex quite often, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, with Sundays usually being the best. That evening, Claire returned home from work, and the children were telling her about Disneyland. She was not very happy. She put them off with all sorts of excuses, but it was all a smokescreen because she didn't want to leave work for a week. That evening, I told her that I would really like her to come. I will pay for all this, and if not, then we will go without her. She was a little upset that I was paying for all this, so I quickly agreed to pay half if she went. After 2 days of the kids pestering her about it, I arbitrarily gave her a week to make a decision, presumably because the flight was selling out. She reluctantly agreed. Leslie, Mark, Max, and I were very happy. We were happy, at least until we arrived on spring break Monday and decided to relax and go to the beach. Claire said she was just going to check on something and catch up with us. We didn't see her until we got back to the hotel for dinner. Then on Tuesday, he went to Universal Studios, and Claire turned it down too. That night, after everyone was asleep, I bought Claire a ticket home. When she woke up the next morning, the four of us were getting ready to go to Disneyland. The kids were very excited, but Claire was not. She explained to us that she just needed the morning and would join us in the afternoon. That's when I gave her a ticket and told her she should just go home and go back to work. She was very upset, and I said that we should be on vacation and she could make a choice, work or us. We were leaving in 5 minutes, with or without her. She came with us and had fun, but she will never go on holiday with us again. Life went on, and my company grew to 150 employees, although I never talked to Claire about it. She thought she made more money than me, and that made her feel good. Claire called my pump and motor repair shop, making it sound like it was a tiny repair shop or something. If I started talking about my company and our millions of dollars in sales, I figured it would make her feel insecure. Claire seemed to be completely safe with me and her family life now, and that was enough for me. However, she was not safe at work. There were 4 people in front of her at work, and she only wanted one. Albert Morris's owner, CEO position was out of reach for her, but there were 3 vice president positions she could apply for, one of which she particularly coveted. There was a VP of administration, a VP of operations, and a VP of creative. Claire wanted to be VP of creative so badly that she got a taste of it. However, the current holder of the position, Jeff Barons, was still quite young and was her mentor and supporter in her career with the company. She accepted one of the other positions and worked twice as hard to understand everything they did. The VP of operations was an experienced company employee who respected Claire and believed she would take over Jeff's position when he retired. The vice president for administration was new, and his name was Charles "Chuck" Adams. He was relatively new to the company and believed he could crack Madame Serius's code. In his mind, she was just a child. And since he loved a challenge, he was going to seriously try to get her into bed. He knew that she wanted a promotion, and this fact would become the fulcrum on which his seduction would be based. Claire must know that Albert Morris would make the decision without much input from the other vice presidents. However, he also knew that she was unsure of herself, and he could use this point of view as best he could. At the end of November, Albert told the other vice presidents that Jeff was resigning, but he said nothing yet because he wanted to announce it at the Christmas party in December. Chuck immediately began working on Claire. The next time he saw her, he made sure to mention her great job and how she should become vice president. In the remaining time before the Christmas party, he made sure to hint or make subtle hints that the other vice presidents had contributed to the promotion. He also made sure to tell Claire that the company needed new blood, so the next vice president would likely come from outside the firm, like himself. Chuck's plan was definitely working. Claire was stressed. She knew deep down that Albert would make a decision if and when there was a vacancy for the position of vice president. She also knew that if Jeff retired, he would recommend her. He had already told her that, and after 5 promotions, she trusted Jeff. However, she couldn't shake the growing doubt in her mind that her hard work might not be enough. It made sense that the next vice president could come from outside, like Chuck. Of course, Claire didn't know what would happen at the Christmas party, but by then she was much more vulnerable to Chuck's plan. These uncertainties kept popping up in her mind. Dave wasn't looking forward to Claire's Christmas party at all. Every year it was the same. Claire was the organizer, host, and general overseer of the party. This role and her usual business-like approach meant that Dave would be alone for the entire evening. She would place him at dinner next to the boring men, while she sat with the most important clients who were always invited. Then she would spend the rest of the evening working one way or another while he stood at the bar drinking with Jeff. When some new employee or longtime employee who didn't like Madame Sirius asked him to dance, he politely refused. One time he made the mistake of dancing with another woman, and it didn't end well. Then they went home late, and she was really tired. This year Dave had enough, and, as they were driving to the party, he had a short conversation with Claire. "Listen, Claire, I'm tired of the same thing every year at your Christmas party," he said. She replied, "What do you mean?" "It's simple. I'm not going to spend another party alone and bored. If you ignore me all night and don't even give me one dance, I'll leave early." She was so caught up in all the details of the party and her role in it that she simply went along with what he said, essentially ignoring him. Dave knew he would go home early, and he did. However, he had a very interesting and disturbing conversation with Jeff before leaving. Of course, after dinner and the traditional CEO speech, the party was full of news about Jeff's upcoming retirement next year. Dave asked Jeff about it and learned some very interesting things. First of all, Jeff was 60, and he and his wife wanted to travel. They had enough money and they wanted to enjoy it before it was too late. Then came the interesting part. Jeff thought Claire might do something stupid to try to secure a promotion to his place. He heard Chuck talking to her and putting doubts in Claire's mind that her amazing work, skills, and experience might not be enough. Jeff knew about her obsession with work and her insecurities firsthand. Claire even told him about the trip to Disneyland and how it caused her so much internal conflict that she couldn't do it again. Dave also learned about Claire's work nickname at this time. He knew from his checks and the fact that she had done nothing suspicious in all these years that she was completely dedicated to her work. However, he did not know about the nickname Madame Seriousness and how many men she had actually rejected, both colleagues and clients. It was alarming to learn that it looked like this Chuck guy was going to try to win his wife. What's more, it didn't help that Claire seemed focused on communicating with one particular person that night. Of course, she was busy with her duties of managing the party, but she kept coming back to the same person. Younger than Claire and Dave, and clearly handsome, this guy clearly knew it. Dave asked Jeff who it was, and was not surprised to learn that it was Chuck, the vice president of administration, exactly the man he had warned Dave about. It was almost 10:00 p.m., and Dave had drunk quite a bit and refused a couple of dances. He decided it was time to leave, but gave Claire a chance and began walking in her direction. As he approached Claire and Chuck, Claire noticed him coming and didn't want him to interrupt their conversation. She discussed information with Chuck about how to get the position of vice president, and he willingly shared information. Claire knew Dave wanted to dance with her, but she was busy with work. So she made eye contact with Dave and then deliberately turned away from him. Dave wasn't stupid and took the insult for what it was. He turned around and left. Claire didn't notice his departure for obvious reasons and was too busy with the rest of the night to even miss him. It wasn't until 1 a.m., as the party was about to end, that she noticed Dave was gone. She asked Jeff, who was still there, if he had seen Dave and was unhappy with his answer. "He told me that if you didn't dance with him, he would leave. He told me that he already told you this. And when you didn't dance with him, he left." Claire felt embarrassed, but remembered that Dave actually said something like that. But at the same time, she was angry because he did not support her work. She was working on Chuck and her promotion. How could he do this to her? Her anger grew as she waited for a taxi to go home. As she walked through the door, she built up enough energy to burst into the bedroom and wake Dave with a loud, "How could you just leave? I was so embarrassed that you left me there without even saying goodbye. You say you support my work, but you left me in limbo when I needed that support. How could you—" At this point, Dave woke up and had enough. "Listen, I warned you, Claire, that if you ignore me all night, I'll leave. I just needed one dance. Do you think I feel like you've literally turned your back on me for the company of another man? This startled Claire, not only the tone, which was unusual for Dave, but also the implication that she was more interested in the other man than in him. Dave continued, I can't dance with anyone but you, and you don't want to dance with me. I respect that, and don't even look at the women you work with. But then you should show more interest in Chuck than to me. It's too much. I supported you at home and in every possible way I could think of. I'm proud of your success at work and have told you that many times and done everything you asked. However, sometimes I'm a little disappointed that we don't spend holidays together and work clearly comes first in your life. Now I'm going to bed. Claire left the room and went downstairs to think about what Dave had said. After much thought, she realized that Dave was right, and she had to change. First, she just needed to get promoted to vice president, and then she could relax a little and pay more attention to Dave and the kids. By the time she came to this conclusion, it was almost 7 a.m., so she joined Dave in bed. She tried to spend quite a lot of time at home over Christmas, at least quite a lot for her, and tried to spend quality time with her husband and children. Then the new year came and she returned to serious work. Now that the news has been made public, Chuck has stepped up his campaign against Claire. Albert announced that they are accepting applications and interviews will begin in February. They hope to appoint a new vice president by April. Jeff asked Claire if she was going to apply, and she responded by giving him a completed application form and an updated resume. Jeff tried his best to explain that Albert would make the decision and that Jeff supported her candidacy. However, despite his efforts, he could tell that Claire was very unsure of her chances. Of course, Chuck was the root cause of these insecurities. Dave's parents' wedding anniversary was on February 10th, and Dave and his children usually went to celebrate with them for the weekend. Claire hasn't gone for the last 11 years, so it wasn't a surprise to Dave that she wouldn't go this time either. His parents lived 4 hours away across the state line, so they usually left right after school on Friday and returned on Sunday afternoon. Dave asked Claire to go again, but she told him she couldn't leave because of an important meeting with a client on Friday. Chuck continued his maneuvers towards Claire. He started with sexual innuendos and increased the flirting. Claire became more and more anxious every day. She was the first one to show up at the front desk when the mail arrived. She tried to subtly ask Sherry from HR how many applications had been received. Sherry worked directly for Chuck, and he became convinced that he had inflated the number of external applications and their qualifications. Sherry then relayed this information to Claire, unwittingly aiding in her seduction. Because Chuck spent so much time at work next to Claire, he learned on Monday that Dave was leaving with the kids for the upcoming weekend. Conveniently, his own wife, Doris, was going to visit her twin brother, Mike, that same weekend. Mike and his wife lived about an hour away, and Claire always followed the same routine. She left on Friday afternoon and stayed overnight, returning on Saturday evening. Mike and Doris were as close as twins can be, and this usually happened once every 2 months. Chuck couldn't believe his luck. After an all-out attack all week, on Friday morning, Chuck made sure Sherry told Claire about a star candidate for vice president who had just submitted her resume. After Chuck was sure Sherry had spoken to Claire, he made his move. He walked into her office at 4 p.m. and asked what Claire would be doing for dinner. I was just planning on going home when I was done and eating the leftovers, she replied. Why don't we go get something to eat somewhere? Then we can really work on strategy to make sure you get the promotion you deserve. Claire thought about it. Dave and the kids were away, and she still needed to eat. Okay, how about we leave at 6 p.m., she answered Chuck. Chuck was delighted. I'll make a reservation for us at a nice restaurant. See you in the parking lot at 6 p.m. Claire spent the next 2 hours unable to work. She couldn't stop thinking about all the candidates for the coveted position of vice president and how she could make sure it would be her. By the time it was almost 6 p.m., she was extremely agitated. She then received a text message from her husband, Dave. Hope the important meeting went well. Any plans for tonight? Claire thought about her answer. She didn't want to lie, but at the same time, she couldn't tell him that she was going to meet Chuck. She replied, "The meeting went well. I'm going to have a drink with some work colleagues to celebrate." Dave was surprised by this unusual behavior of Madame Seriousness. He replied, "Have a good time, miss you." Claire was surprised by how easily the lie came, but she rationalized that it was a big promotion, so it was all for a good cause. Dave would be proud of her. Dave suggested that Claire would head to the bar across from her office, Dino's. He decided to check his locator app at 6:30 p.m. and noticed she wasn't at that bar, but at D'Angelo's, a high-end restaurant. He couldn't believe it. Did she lie to him? Claire and Dave had been to D'Angelo's a few times, but he couldn't remember if there was a bar there. He kept checking the locator app. At approximately 9 p.m., the app showed that Claire was now at Skylab, the city's most popular club. Dave didn't want to be paranoid. It could all be explained by the fact that Claire needed dinner, so they went for food first and then drinks. This was still unusual behavior for Claire, so after his parents and children went to bed, he logged into the Skycam. The Skycam was a fun gimmick from Skylab that made it the hottest club in town. Claire created it as part of a marketing campaign. Positioned above the DJ, the Skycam showed part of the dance floor directly in front of the DJ. The camera slowly panned back and forth. Privacy issues were addressed with a notice at the entrance to the club and a sign on the DJ console. Local celebrities were invited to make sure they were visible on Skycam, which was, of course, broadcasting live. Skylab also apparently had a highlight reel of some of the top celebrities who visited the club. It was a very popular feature, and yet it only covered about a quarter of the dance floor, so it was easy to miss the camera's view. Dave watched for about 15 minutes when, to his regret, he saw his wife and none other than Chuck walking by. Dave took a deep breath and tried to relax. All this was understandable. However, Dave began to write down what he saw. The group from work included Chuck, and they were just having fun. He continued to look and carefully looked for other people from Claire's work. Dave didn't recognize anyone until he saw Claire dancing with Chuck again. However, this time it was a slow song and they were dancing too close for Dave's comfort. Chuck was everywhere and she didn't resist at all. In fact, she seemed to reciprocate his feelings. When the song ended, Claire and Chuck were still visible at the edge of the camera's view. It was very clear to Dave that they were now kissing. Dave then went to his photo gallery and found a list of Claire's work emergency contacts, which he photographed. He dialed Doris, Chuck's wife. She answered the third call. "Hello, are you Doris Adams?" "Yes, it's me. How did you get this number?" She answered, "This is Dave Baker. I'm the husband of Claire Hughes, who works with your husband Chuck. I'm calling because right now, your husband and my wife are at Skylab doing things that won't pass the test of loyalty." Dave heard a gasp and Doris responded, "That scoundrel, I gave him a second chance and this is what he's doing to me. What are you going to do?" Dave quickly explained, "I'm of course going to divorce her. It's a long story and I won't bore you with the details, but I have no other choice. There's a problem. I'm tracking it with our locator app, so I know when they get back to our house or hotel, but I'm 4 hours away and won't be able to catch them there." Doris made Dave very happy with her answer. "I'm not home tonight, so they might as well go to our house. Look, I'm only an hour away with my brother Mike, who, by the way, hates Chuck. We might as well leave now, and by the time we get back to town, you can tell us where they are and we can surprise them." Dave was very pleased. "Sounds like a plan. I'll send you a recording of their antics at Skylab, and I'd appreciate it if you sent me anything you come up with as a surprise for them." Doris confirmed they were on their way while Dave continued to watch the Skycam and his locator app. Half an hour later, Claire was on her way. She was heading towards a residence that was not Dave's house, so it must have been the Adams house. Dave sent Doris the information. Meanwhile, Claire felt very strange. Alcohol and beautiful men did their job. She couldn't wait to get into bed with Chuck and seal the deal that would guarantee her promotion. She didn't think about consequences, only about results, and she was desperate in her pursuit of results. An hour later, Claire woke up from her post-sex slumber. She was still pretty drunk, But the realization that she had cheated on Dave hit her. Yes, it was for a good cause, but it was still cheating. She decided that she had better return home. However, Chuck also came to his senses at this time and wanted a second round. Claire gave in to his persuasion, and when Doris and Mike arrived, they were in the midst of it. Mike made sure he made enough videos of the lovers, and then Doris intervened. The next thing Claire knew was that someone drags her by the hair. Slap! The same someone hit Claire in the face and then slapped her with the back of their hand. Unfortunately for Claire, the back of the hand had a ring on Doris's finger, and it cut Claire's cheek. "Get out of my house!" Doris screamed as she dragged Claire towards the door. Claire freed herself, grabbed her clothes, and ran as fast as she could. Doris turned around to see what Mike was doing with her husband. Chuck huddled in pain on the floor next to the bed. Claire got dressed in her car and then drove to the hospital emergency room. She had 3 stitches because the wound was too big for glue or tape. She returned home and dragged herself into the bedroom, crying the whole way. How could she explain the cut on her cheek to Dave? Will Doris tell Dave what happened? How could she do such a stupid thing? With these questions swirling in her head, she fell asleep. Meanwhile, Dave was busy. After receiving the video from Doris, he had a job to do. He first emailed his lawyer asking him to forward the following information to the top divorce lawyer at his firm. Enclosed were both post-nuptial agreements, a Skycam video, and a video from Doris. He also attached his log of all the events Claire missed for the kids, in case she decides to fight for custody. There was no way, after all the uncertainty he had been through, other than divorce was the only option. He then sent Claire a message explaining that he and the children would be returning home on Monday, not Sunday. This would allow Dave to change the locks on the house and perhaps arrange a meeting with her at work that day. He wasn't worried about moving the money since it was already so divided. Claire woke up hungover and thought she was having a bad dream until she touched her cheek and realized it wasn't a dream. It was a nightmare. Looking at her phone, she read a message from Dave. She now had more time to come up with her story. She didn't know whether to get involved with Chuck or not. He solved this problem by showing up at her house on Saturday afternoon. "Chuck, what are you doing here?" she asked. "I'm not welcome at home anymore. That's why I came here," Chuck replied. "Well, you can't stay. What will the neighbors say?" Then she quickly added, "Do you think Doris will tell Dave?" "I'm pretty sure she already said. I heard Mike and her talking after they got tired of kicking me and I passed out. In fact, I think it was Dave who told Doris." Then it dawned on Claire, the locator app she insisted on. Dave must have used it to find her, and then informed Doris. Claire was overcome with horror and slammed the door in Chuck's face. Monday arrived and Claire went to work. What else could she do? She applied makeup to minimize the damage to her cheek and went to work. Everything was relatively normal until 1 p.m., when a young man she didn't recognize came to her office door. "Are you Claire Hughes?" he asked. "Yes, I am," Claire replied. "You have been handed it," he said, and handed her the envelope. He took a photo of her and left. Claire and her world fell apart. Meanwhile, Dave was busy changing the locks on the doors of his house. He explained to the children what would happen as they drove home from his parents. He knew school wasn't an option that day, so they were in their rooms, contemplating the destruction of their parents' marriage. Claire finally found the strength to call Dave. Dave answered the second call. "Yes, Claire." "Dave, I made a terrible mistake and I need to talk to you about it," she replied. "You are absolutely right about the mistake. After all the post-nuptial agreements, 13 years, 3 children, and all my love, you made a fatal mistake. You killed our marriage. This is the last time I will talk to you until the divorce is final. I will pursue everything in terms of post-nuptial agreements. Just sign the divorce papers, then you can spend all your time with your true love and not worry about us interfering with your work." And after that, Dave hung up the phone. Claire collapsed into a puddle of tears, her life in ruins. Her insecurities cost her everything. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.